On the 20th of September, the Secretary of War received a cable from Colonel Preston Garvey, the senior Minuteman officer on Far Harbor. I regret to report a disastrous engagement which took place on the 19th of September, between our own 13th Minuteman Company and the forces of the Children of Atom, local trappers, and what appear to be gunner mercenary forces. The enemy launched wave after wave of attacks on the slopes of Mount Cadillac trying to capture the settlement of Acadia. Due to the gallant resistance of the 13th, the position was maintained. However, our forces were almost completely annihilated. In the communications room of the Citadel, a coded message from the Commonwealth was received on the 24th of September of 2291. As soon as it was decoded, a scribe rushed down to Ring A of the Citadel to relay the news to High Elder Maxon. The scribe found Maxon in conference with the other elders of the Eastern Brotherhood. The renegade synth known as Dance had been killed in battle on an island far to the north. And what's more, he had died as an honored hero of the Minutemen. The news was met with stunned silence by the assembled elders. Later in his office, Maxon was furious at the news. His supposed allies had harbored a synth renegade that was now being honored in death. Some of his advisors urged him to rip up the Treaty of Alliance with the Commonwealth and to declare war. Others however counseled caution. Dance had never been a large threat to the Brotherhood, and he was still held in high regard by many of the rank-and-file Brotherhood. The Commonwealth position on synth tolerance was not a secret, and besides which the balance of trade between the Commonwealth and the capital region was growing on a daily basis. Indeed, a lot of the ammunition used in the Brotherhood's campaign to subjugate the capital region originated within the Commonwealth. Throwing away the alliance over this matter was not worth it. At least for now. The Battle of Acadia had been the wake-up call that President Hancock had been hoping for. Even his most ardent critics now had to fully support him in light of the gunners being involved in Far Harbor. As soon as the vote was taken, a runner was sent from the local telegram office to the castle with the coded message that President Hancock had composed. It instructed the Minutemen to prepare for war. The 8th Air Mobile Lance began transporting the 1st Minuteman regulars to fill in the manpower shortage left when the 13th had been obliterated. Preston Garvey had no illusions as to how difficult the campaign would be on Far Harbor. The gunners were a tough enemy, and this time they did not have the element of surprise, nor did he have Captain Dancer giving his advice on tactics and strategy. Garvey would have to draw upon his experiences in the previous 2 wars to plan out a strategy to take the island. With the 1st Company arriving on the island, he could stabilize the front lines and give some much-needed rest to the scouts and the Far Harbor Minutemen. What was left of the 13th Minutemen was sent back to Port Parker as garrison troops. Garvey took a vertibird back to the Commonwealth to begin organizing the surge of troops headed north. Back in the Commonwealth, activity began to pick up. Messengers spread out through the Commonwealth calling the reserves back into active duty. Army agents began placing orders at factories for more ammunition and canned foods. Ships were being hired or commandeered to begin transporting the army north. The Commonwealth was going to war. Before the mobilization really got underway, John Stockton, the Secretary of the Treasury, came to Congress with dire news. The Commonwealth government would run out of money before the end of the year. The costs to mobilize were more than the taxes that they were collecting. Without a massive tax increase or other sources of revenue, the war could not proceed. After holding discussions with several settlement representatives, rich local families, and trading groups, it was decided that the government would have to finance the war through war bonds and paper currency rather than caps. Congress passed a law requiring merchants to accept paper bills in place of caps for all government debts. President Hancock instructed Captain Wallace McGann, from the Military Liaison Office, to reach out to the Brotherhood. Hancock would invoke Article 5 of the New England Treaty. This would compel the Brotherhood to support the Commonwealth in the war. The response from the Brotherhood was less than enthusiastic. They offered to ferry troops north using their vertibird fleet but were ambiguous about sending troops to Far Harbor. Back on Far Harbor, Grand Confessor Richter had been badly hurt in his confrontation with the Minuteman commander. He had beaten down the large Minuteman with Atom's judgment and was about to finish him off. when a last-second laser blast caught him in the eyes. Richter was taken back for healing by the Archimist. She did what she could but declared that Atom had seen fit to permanently take Richter's eyes. Henceforth, Richter would have to lead the children of Atom blind. The Battle of Arcadia had a profound effect on the Harbour men's attitude towards the Commonwealth. Alan Lee once again pressed the issue of union with the Commonwealth. This time the vote was overwhelmingly in favour for union. Far Harbour Town, along with Old Longfellow's settlement, officially joined the Commonwealth on October 20, 2291. Alan Lee replaced Captain Avery as mayor of the town and immediately began asking for volunteers for the Minutemen. Now that their involvement had been discovered, the gunners felt no need to be timid about their deployment. With the financial approval from their employers, they began to ship over regular gunner troops. Baker Company of the 2nd Gunner Guards began arriving in early October. George Company would arrive in mid-November along with artillery and vertibird support. The gunners also sent in the rest of the 2nd Gunner Rangers, the Gunner Special Forces unit. Gunner Colonel Reeves arrived in October and met with Richter and the remaining trapper leader at the nucleus. He announced that since the gunners would be providing the main offensive capability, that he would henceforth be in overall command. Both Richter and the trapper commander protested. Colonel Reeves threatened to leave the island and let them face the Minutemen by themselves if they did not agree. Ultimately both Richter and Bilge had no choice but to agree to the new command structure. Colonel Reeves' first act as overall commander was to order the Children of Atom to launch another attack against the Aldersea Spar. This time, however, the Children of Atom ran into the prepared positions of the 1st Minutemen. Using camouflaged missile teams, they picked off the Children of Atom power armor at long ranges. Once the remaining attackers got close, the Minutemen opened up using massed firepower to blunt and turn back the attack. The Children of Atom retreated after suffering heavy casualties. At the same time in the south, trappers began sniping at the Minutemen front-line positions. Using high-powered hunting rifles, they kept the Minutemen troopers pinned down for hours. Meanwhile, the 2nd Platoon from Baker Company began climbing the mountain to try and dislodge the Far Harbour Minutemen assigned to Arcadia. Reinforcements from the 1st Minutemen were rushed to the area but were intercepted on the trail up the mountain by the Gunner Rangers. After a bloody firefight, both the Gunner Regulars and Rangers withdrew. Dealing casualties to the Minutemen and wearing them down had been the point of the entire fight. Colonel Reeves was impressed with the Minutemen response. He had heard that the Minutemen were better trained and organized than typical settlement guards. Now that he knew more about them, he could plan out a strategy to deal with them. The volunteer drive in Far Harbour Town had yielded almost no new recruits for the Minutemen. In November, Mayor Lee decided that Far Harbour had to contribute its fair share of troops. He introduced involuntary conscription. The Far Harbour Minutemen began rounding up citizens off the street. These were sent to the Visitors' Center for basic training. When Colonel Garvey returned to the island and learned of this practice, he immediately put a stop to it. He argued that the Minutemen had always been a volunteer force and should remain so. The latter sided with Mayor Lee and appealed the matter to President Hancock by radio. Garvey threatened to resign if the practice continued. President Hancock sided with Colonel Garvey. He had the volunteers released. In early November, the 3rd Minuteman, the 6th Field Artillery, and the 2nd Pioneer Companies set sail to the island, along with several barges loaded down with supplies. In mid-November, case officers from the Civilian Intelligence Agency arrived on the island. They were some of the first members of the newly formed Clandestine Operations Branch. Their task was to infiltrate enemy territory and send back first-hand intelligence. One posed as a local farmer and the other as a gun runner. Using a rowboat, the farmer landed at Fringe Cove and made his way into the heart of enemy territory. The gunrunner used a small fishing boat and approached the gunners at Rayburn Point to sell them ammunition. As early December arrived, the cold weather intensified. Snow began to pile up in the mountain passes. The winter of 2291 was even colder than the previous year, with deep snow drifts making large troop movements very difficult. Several locals claimed that this was the worst winter that they had ever seen. The ports at Far Harbour Town, Points Parker and Rayburn Island iced over, making sea traffic impossible. The only resupply possible would be by vertibird until the ice thawed. Large-scale offensive operations were practically impossible. However, special forces units on both sides made use of the time. Of particular note was the Gunner Rangers' attack on the Far Harbor water supply in January 2292. As the ice began to thaw in early March, the harbors on the island were once again accessible. The build-up of forces restarted. Ships headed north to Far Harbor carrying more supplies and troops. The gunners were aware that the Minutemen build-up was going faster than their own build-up. They assigned the trappers to harass or stop the ships coming from the Commonwealth. The trappers used their sailing skills to intercept lone ships coming from the Commonwealth, sometimes sinking the vessels with their valuable cargoes, other times taking the ships as prizes and dragging their unfortunate crews to an uncertain fate in Southwest Harbor. The harassment got so bad that by late March the build-up of Minuteman forces came to a halt. The command staff looked for a solution. Squads of Minutemen were drafted as Marines for the ships. Henceforth the cargo vessels would travel in convoy to fend off the trappers. The pirates would still try to harass the convoys or pick off stragglers. Attempts to neutralize the sea base by vertibird assault failed. The gunners had augmented the gun turrets in the harbor and prevented vertibirds from attacking the area. A direct sea assault was out of the question. Attacking ships would have to first neutralize the outer defenses. Missile batteries at Northwood Quarry, Huntress and Cranberry Island as well as the Vim factory. They would then have to fight their way ashore at Southwest Harbor, by which time reinforcements from the gunners and the MS Azalea would arrive. Minutemen planners expected that there would be heavy casualties from this plan. Using artillery was also not feasible. The trappers could easily send the boats out to sea. Commonwealth intelligence also knew that the trappers kept captives in Southwest Harbor. Garvey wanted to avoid civilian casualties. Scout Lieutenant Madeline Stewart came up with a radical solution. A mixed raiding force of scouts, Marines, and Minutemen would board 3 disguised fishing trawlers and approach Southwest Harbor at night. The assault force would land on the south side of the town, launching an attack as a distraction while sailors would pilot the vessels to the mouth of the harbor and scuttle them. This would trap the enemy fleet in the harbor. The raiding force would then free any captives and disable or destroy as many automated guns as possible. This would allow Minutemen and Brotherhood vertibirds to extract them at dawn. Preston Garvey was hesitant about approving the plan. However, Captain Prescott and Star Paladin Olmsted approved of the daring proposal. Commander Jeremiah O'Brien provided 3 older fishing trawlers for the raid: Iris, Thistle, and Naiad. Lieutenant Commander Ragnar Jorgensen of the 7th Transport Detachment would be in charge of the task force. Each boat had extra armored protection installed on top. Deep in the holds they carried explosive scuttling charges and 10 tons of concrete to sink the boats and block the harbor permanently. The raiding force included 10 Marines, 8 scouts, a dozen regular Minutemen from the 7th Company, and 9 sailors. The only concern that the raiding force had was that a gunner relief column might arrive early to help out the trappers. Colonel Garvey volunteered to have an artillery barrage dropped on the northern side of the island to distract the gunners. A Commonwealth spy, deep in trapper territory, verified that almost all the enemy fleet was in port. The raid was set for the 17th of April when there would be no moon. The task force left from Far Harbor town at dusk and headed out into the Atlantic before turning west to approach their target. Just after 2 a.m., the task force passed the MS Azalea and Huntress Island with no challenge. Things changed as they approached Cranberry Island. A signal light flashed out a challenge, and when it was not answered, a siren began to wail. Soon signal flares lit up the outer harbor. Gunfire erupted from the positions on Cranberry Island, Northwood Quarry, Vim Factory, and from Southwest Harbor. The task force turned sharply north towards the Southwest Harbor docks. The raiding force huddled under cover till the ships touched the docks and then sprang up to climb the hillside. A murderous crossfire from automated turrets cut down the first few Marines. Slowly but surely the Minutemen gained a tenuous foothold on the southern end of the town. After the Minutemen had offloaded, the boat crews steered towards the mouth of the harbor. one sailor on each boat returning fire with a heavy machine gun while the other two worked the boat. The lead boat, Iris, took the brunt of the enemy fire and began sinking low in the water. Thistle moved up and took over the lead, followed by Naiad. Thistle reached the eastern end of the harbour mouth and the crew dropped anchor and set the timed explosives before jumping overboard. Naiad followed suit. The crew on the Iris threw a rope to Naiad and slowly pulled their boat into position just behind Naiad. As they were leaving the boat, Petty Officer Akinyemi noticed trappers boarding the Thistle to steer it out of the way. He turned back to fire at them. The rest of the crew of the Iris came back to help him. 5 minutes later the scuttling charges went off. The three vessels settled to the bottom of the harbour entrance, blocking the trapper fleet access to the sea. The crew of the Iris died defending their ship. The remaining sailors made their way to the Minutemen position. Together they set about freeing the captives and destroying the automated gun turrets in the town. As the sun rose, a mixed force of trappers and gunners formed up just west of the town to overrun the Commonwealth positions. Minutemen artillery began raining down on the edge of the town. Using this as cover, a fleet of vertibirds arrived overhead to evacuate the stranded troops and captives. Minutemen artillery then rained down on the town and the stranded boats. The threat posed by the pirate fleet ended. 9 Commonwealth Medals of Valor would be earned by the raiding force. 3 of those medals were posthumous awards for the crew of the Iris. For conspicuous gallantry under fire, news of the raid spread throughout the Wasteland and many were impressed. Even the Brotherhood reluctantly praised the Minutemen. High Elder Maxon remarked that it was the bravest damn thing he'd ever heard of. In view of their feat at Southwest Harbor, Congress passed a bill calling for the 7th Transport Detachment to be reformed as the Commonwealth Navy, a separate military branch on April 29, 2292. With the supply chain problem solved, the build-up of forces could continue. The Minuteman command staff came up with a two-pronged strategy. Once the rest of the army arrived by late June, they would begin 2 simultaneous drives from the north and the south. This would steamroll the opposition from 2 different sides, not allowing the enemy to concentrate their defenses. Once the forces linked up in the south, they would attack the nucleus and effectively end the war. Colonel Reeves received intelligence from his spies and from the gunner rangers. He knew that the Minutemen had 2 combat companies on the island. Soon they would have enough troops to crush his forces. He had to strike as quickly as possible. He would use the caves under the Kitteredge Pass to infiltrate troops into the heart of the Minuteman territory. If he could capture Port Parker, then the war on the island would be over for all intents and purposes. He would be ready for action by late May. In early May an incident took place that almost made Preston Garvey resign his command. The new captain of the 3rd Minutemen, James Sullivan, had captured 3 gunner troopers. They were identified as ex-members of the 13th Minutemen. Without a trial he had them immediately executed. Colonel Garvey was infuriated by this action. He had Captain Sullivan arrested for murder. A court-martial was held at Port Parker. Garvey was shocked when the other 2 officers voted to acquit Sullivan. He wired his resignation to President Hancock on the 19th of May and asked to be relieved of command immediately. Hancock told Garvey that he needed time to find a replacement commander and to stay in charge for the moment. The Commonwealth spy selling supplies to the gunners noted that they had been ordering more ammunition in May. After a few drinks she got a talkative gunner lieutenant to discuss the upcoming offensive. The drunken officer admitted that the gunners would attack in less than a week. The next morning she sailed north to reach Port Parker with the news. She then returned to the gunners before they became suspicious. Garvey forgot about his resignation and began planning a counter to this assault. Using the 1st Minutemen, squads of Marines, and what remained of the 13th, he manned the defenses on the southern and northern borders. He gathered all of the 3rd, 4th, and 14th Minutemen in the center. Garvey then sent the Minutemen scouts to infiltrate the caves under the Kitteredge Pass. They eliminated the trapper guards inside. The scouts captured and held the southern end of the caves at Pinecrest Cavern and waited for the gunners to arrive. On the 27th of May the lead gunner troops entered the caves and were ambushed by the Minutemen scouts. The Battle of Kitteredge Pass had begun. The gunners pressed the scouts trying to get through the caverns, but the Commonwealth forces held firm. A squad of gunner rangers came from the northern end of the caves to try and flank the scouts, but they ran into the lead elements of the 3rd Minutemen. Artillery from Acadia began raining down on the southern end of the pass. Even though the offensive had been discovered, Colonel Reeves was determined to continue with the plan. He ordered artillery from Point Rayburn to begin raining down on the northern end of the pass. Despite the artillery, both sides moved into the Kitteredge Pass and engaged around 1 p.m. The 4th Minutemen traded fire with Baker Company. Meanwhile, the 3rd Minutemen managed to turn the right flank on George Company and began to turn west and intensify their fire. Spotters on nearby Mount Cadillac adjusted their fire and helped the company advance. At about 6 p.m. Reeves could see that the battle was lost and ordered the gunner rangers to cover their withdrawal. The exhausted Minutemen pushed down to Pinecrest Cavern and stopped for the night. By morning the gunners had set up defensive positions down the slope and the Battle of Kitteredge Pass was effectively over. Colonel Reeves contacted his superiors. With the defeated Kitteredge Pass and the Minutemen building up their forces, the gunner forces on the island could not hold the island for much longer. The Gunner High Command asked the Enclave to fund further reinforcements. The Enclave in turn asked Richter to give up the remaining 3 nuclear missiles as payment. He would not. The Enclave advised the gunners to hold on to the island as long as practical, but that they would not fund any more reinforcements. As the situation grew desperate, Richter became more paranoid and suspicious. Brother Cain and Zealot Thiel walked around the nucleus looking for signs of disloyalty. Any worshippers that did not display sufficient devotion to Atom were subject to arrest. Zealots that were perceived as not fighting hard enough were reassigned to fight in the most dangerous positions on the front lines. A few children of Atom worshippers had even been executed by Zealots for displaying a lack of faith. Over the next few weeks, children of Atom began deserting their posts and leaving the nucleus. Commonwealth intelligence officers, working with Circle of Steel operatives in the capital region, located Sister Gwyneth hiding in Megaton. They persuaded her to return to Far Harbor and speak to the children of Atom deserters. By late June, the 5th, 7th, and 9th Minutemen had arrived on the island and the Commonwealth forces were ready to begin Garvey's offensive. On the northern flank the 3rd and 9th Minutemen, supported by the 1st Armored Infantry and the Scouts, would begin a drive to capture Dalton Farm. In the south the 1st, 5th, 7th and 14th Minutemen would begin their assault on the MS Azalea and then turn west to face the main gunner force. On the 2nd of July the southern force crashed through the frontier. Trapper Scouts saw the overwhelming force facing them and abandoned the MS Azalea. A squad of Minutemen claimed the wreck on the 5th. Colonel Reeves saw that the situation was quickly becoming untenable. However, he decided to try one last desperate gamble. If the children of Atom could hold the northern force, the gunners and trappers could defeat the southern force and then quickly turn back to face the northern force. He might still be able to pull out a victory. He would however have to rely on his allies in the upcoming battles. Spearheaded by the 1st Armored Infantry, Dalton Farm was recaptured on the 7th of July by the Northern Force. The children of Atom threw disorganized counterattacks at the Minutemen but found themselves being pushed further and further back. Reeves split the Gunner Rangers in two. He sent part of the Rangers north to support the Zealot defenders to hold back the Northern Force. The other half he sent to attack the Minutemen artillery on Mount Cadillac. The Rangers ran into the prepared positions of the 4th Minutemen and became bogged down on the mountain. Gunner vertibirds tried to pounce on the Minutemen but were met in the air by Brotherhood vertibirds. On the 13th of July both sides arrayed for the last major battle of the war. Reeves placed Baker Company on the right flank to attack. The trappers defended the left flank. The weakened George Company and a force of Zealots were placed in the center to engage the main Minuteman force. He had no troops available for a reserve force. Garvey countered by placing the inexperienced 7th Minutemen in the center facing off against George Company. The 5th Minutemen would defend against Baker Company. Meanwhile Garvey would use 1st Company to smash through the trapper line. He placed the 14th at the rear to act as a reserve. The battle began badly for the Minutemen. The center and particularly the left flank began to give ground to the gunners. The trappers skillfully defended their positions from cover, making progress difficult for the 1st. Garvey wondered if he should commit the 14th to defend the left, or help the right flank to push through. The artillery positions on Acadia once again made the difference. Being closer to the battle, they could shift their fire quicker than the gunner artillery and more effectively support the infantry. Shells rained down on the trapper positions and forced them to pull back. This helped the 1st make progress. 7 hours into the battle, the 1st finally broke through the trapper line and turned towards the center to attack George Company. The trappers meanwhile abandoned the battlefield and headed south to Northwood Quarry. Garvey sent the 14th to support the 5th. Reeves knew that the battle was lost and began withdrawing, leaving the Zealot forces to cover his retreat. Using pre-arranged signals, he began pulling back all gunner forces to evacuate the island. Unaware that they were being left to their fates, the Zealot forces stubbornly held back the Minutemen until they were overrun and wiped out. The gunners at Rayburn Point began destroying their spare supplies and using their vertibirds and boats to shuttle troops off the island. They stopped all cooperation and communications with the Children of Atom. The Commonwealth spy, codename Magpie, helped with the evacuation in order to gain more intelligence on the gunner mercenaries, and to find the location of their headquarters. On the 18th of July, the Northern Force recaptured Echo Lake Lumber Mill from the Children of Atom. Governor Chamberlain arrived to raise the Commonwealth flag over the settlement once again. By the 19th of July, the northern force of the Minutemen had the gunner position ringed in. The last gunners left the island on the 4th of August. A group of Brotherhood yeomen arrived in August and secured some positions that had been liberated, allowing the Minutemen to focus on the last push to victory. High Elder Maxon made the trip to the island to survey the battlefields. He made a trip up to Acadia and visited the Minuteman graveyard by himself. Rumors spread that the Elder had kneeled down by Dance's grave and wept, but no one could confirm that. Zealot Ware was put in command of the last Zealot units guarding the southern approach to the nucleus. Richter had charged him with holding Radio Tower Hill at all costs. Wounded Zealots were instructed to charge at Minutemen while holding nuclear grenades. They were to kill themselves and any Minutemen that they could reach. Sister Gwyneth went out under a flag of truce to talk to Zealot Ware. The two talked for an hour about their religion and the current situation. She returned and reported that in exchange for letting the Children of Atom have a settlement of their own, that Ware and his troops would lay down arms. Garvey readily agreed to this. The Zealots around Radio Hill laid down arms and came out to surrender. With the Radio Hill garrison neutralized, the southern force linked up with northern force just south of the nucleus. The Children of Atom were now isolated on the small peninsula housing the vessel. Attempts to get the nucleus to surrender failed. Garvey began to make preparations to storm the religious site. Meanwhile, the 5th Minutemen went south to guard the southern flank against any possible attack from Northwood Quarry, while the 9th Minutemen did the same at Zephyr Ridge. Inside the nucleus, Richter gathered up the die-hard loyalists that were left over. Outside the walls, a few fanatical zealots waited for the expected assault. Richter knew that the Minutemen would soon be inside the walls, defiling Atom's holy shrine. He decided that it was time for division. The faithful gathered on top of the vessel to hear a last sermon from Richter. He then went inside and turned the launch keys on the remaining missiles. The Minutemen pulled back as warning sirens sounded from inside the nucleus. The nuclear devices inside the missiles failed to detonate. However, the rocket fuel in the missiles did explode. The thick walls of the nucleus barely containing the blast and collapsing into a smoking pile of rubble. The stunned zealots outside wept as they realized that they had missed division. The Minutemen cheered while Preston Garvey felt regret over the unnecessary death of so many people. Mopping up operations took place in the coming months. With their last ally gone, some trappers used any way possible to get off the island. Others hid deep in the forests and in caves, hoping that the Minutemen would not find them. Colonel Garvey decided to leave his executive officer, Captain Shah, to finish operations in Far Harbor as he headed back to the Commonwealth, quite glad to get away from the island. The Minutemen would reduce the trapper camps one by one for the rest of the year. Northwood's quarry was the last trapper stronghold. The last tunnels under the quarry would not be cleared until April 2293. The end of the war brought about many changes. Far Harbor was now firmly in the grip of the Commonwealth. The government granted titles to unclaimed lands in Far Harbor to rich families that had bought government bonds. They in turn sold the land to new colonists and made outrageous profits. More Commonwealth colonists arrived to create new farms in the western and southern parts of the island. Echo Lake Lumber was re-established as the capital on the island and fresh-cut timber began to flow once again. Soon, timber companies expanded operations to other nearby islands. Northwood Quarry was put into operation as a substitute for the Dunwich Borers Quarry, which miners refused to work in. The 14th Minuteman Company now kept the peace on Far Harbor, fending off occasional trapper incursions on the island and dealing with wildlife. After swearing an oath of allegiance, the remaining children of Atom worshippers were allowed to start a settlement. They continued their worship services but were completely unarmed. In addition, a Minuteman garrison was established nearby, ostensibly to defend them from any threats but mainly to keep an eye on them. The nucleus became an abandoned rubble heap. The nuclear weapons had cracked open when the missiles detonated, spilling a dangerous amount of nuclear material all over the area. Some children of Atom still came by to worship at the site. The Minutemen Scouts were expanded to a second company of troops in recognition of their vital role in the war. The Brotherhood asked the Commonwealth to send scouts to the capital Wasteland to help pacify the area. The campaign had taken its toll on Colonel Preston Garvey. He decided to step away from overall command of the Minutemen and took over command of a frontier garrison on the edge of the glowing sea. The 13th Minuteman was moved back to the Commonwealth. They were assigned a post guarding the Commonwealth from any raider bands coming out of New Hampshire. Despite their rough beginnings, they continued to attract Commonwealth prisoners looking to get out of jail early. Circle of Steel operatives that came to the island found a curious artifact. A headset with an E on it. The headset was taken back to the Citadel for study. The Enclave now had a nuclear weapon capable of destroying an entire city. An asset that they would save for a rainy day. The Commonwealth spy known as Magpie now worked with the gunners as a trusted supplier. Her new mission was to find out the location of their main gunner base of operations. During the war, the Commonwealth economy had been quietly switched from the bottle cap to paper money. Economic problems and opportunities would arise from this decision in the coming years. The Commonwealth Congress collected on President Hancock's promise to expand out west. Slowly but surely, the Commonwealth began growing as it annexed the unclaimed territories west of Sanctuary. The Commonwealth Medal for Valor was created to honor Minutemen that showed extreme courage in the face of the enemy. 6 medals were won by the soldiers at the Battle of Southern Far Harbor. Walter Anderson, Corporal, 14th Minutemen. Hector Contreras, Private, 1st Minutemen. Michael Owens, Sergeant, 1st Minutemen. Major Curie, Surgeon, 3rd Medical Detachment. Ebenezer Learned, Captain, 7th Minutemen. Preston Lincoln Garvey, Colonel, 1st Minutemen, Officer Commanding.
I just wish I had some clean water to drink for once.
My stomach don't feel good.
I could patch you up if you need it. For a small fee, of course.
Do you see something?
Oh, God.
Jesus.
What
Oh
the?
God, I feel sick.